Hello and welcome to a special Inky Read Along produced in partnership with Inquirer Live. My name is Neil Parekh and I am the executive producer and guest host. Our guest today is Mike Sielski, a sports columnist with the Philadelphia Inquirer and author of a book, The Rise, about Kobe Bryant. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. We're also live on the Philadelphia Inquirer's Facebook and Twitter accounts. Thank you so much for the great partnership with the Inquirer. We really appreciate it. As folks, regular viewers know, this is usually Sri's Sunday New York Times read along. But today we're visiting Philadelphia, as it were. And we're going to be talking to Mike Sielski about his book. And then we'll be looking at the Philadelphia Inquirer as well. Please share, please retweet, please comment. Make sure if you're watching on Facebook that you press play on the video so that if you leave a comment, we'll see it. We want to give you a little preview of what's to come. So here's a little teaser video for you. This week, on a special Sri's Sunday Inky Read Along, Neil Parekh interviews Mike Sielski, sports columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Mike is the author of The Rise, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality. In The Rise, readers learn about Kobe's father, Joe, a local basketball standout, Kobe's childhood in Italy, and his time in Lower Merion outside Philadelphia, where Kobe's legend was born. Mike covers a range of Philadelphia sports teams, including Villanova and the 76ers, the Phillies, the Eagles, and the Flyers. We'll definitely have some questions about Gritty, the Flyers mascot. This Inky Read Along is a special project produced in partnership with Inquirer Live. The Inquirer is the largest newspaper owned by a nonprofit, the Lenfest Institute. Regular viewers know that we usually feature the New York Times. The show's official name is Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Occasionally, we highlight other publications, such as the Washington Post, Chicago Sun-Times, the Dallas Morning News, Politico, the Globe and Mail, and the Collegiate Times. The show is produced by Digimentors. We produce high-quality virtual and hybrid events for organizations big and small around the world. We also do social and digital consulting, training, and workshops. Sri Srinivasan is our host. I am the executive producer and guest host, Neil Parekh. Our production team includes Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. Again, Mike Sielski is our guest, live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. That gives you a little bit of a preview of what to expect in today's show. Again, my name is Neil Parekh, and I am the guest host today, sitting in for Sri Srinivasan. We are so glad to have Mike Sielski on the show today. And we're going to be looking at the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is a little bit of a change of pace for us. But we are, again, producing this in partnership with Inquirer Live. So thank you. Let's take a look at who's watching and welcome a few of our guests. We have Emily Silverman watching from Philadelphia, appropriate for our first guest. Emily, thank you so much for joining us. We've actually produced a regular show from Philadelphia before, but never focusing on in the Inquirer. So we're glad to do that today. Doug Levy is joining us from California. Doug, thank you so much for waking up early. We know that this is part of your regular routine. So thank you so much for joining us. Another friend and regular viewer from Philadelphia, Apollo,
thank you. And yes, apparently it's sunny in Philadelphia, so it's so great to have you there. Um, my mom is watching from Fort Lee, which is right over there, actually. You might notice that I'm not in my usual chair, in my red chair at my house in Springfield, Virginia. We're actually visiting the New York area. My mom still has a house in Hastings. I grew up here. And my sister has a place in Fort Lee. She's visiting from Seattle. But we were all here celebrating my daughter's birthday yesterday. So everything is a little bit out of sorts, but we are. Mom, thank you for watching as always. Diane Stefani is watching from South Jersey. Diane, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you. And Stefan is saying good morning to Philly and our New York Times Read Along family. Again, our regular audience, but today, of course, is an Inky Read Along, the moniker for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And he's already hungry for a Philly cheesesteak. Good call, Stefan. Miriam Berkeley is watching from Hell's Kitchen, New York. Emily says Philly cheesesteaks rock, of course, and amazing food. Ken Fisher is watching from Eastern Iowa. Thank you, Ken, for joining us. We have our first viewer from LinkedIn. Again, we're live on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and our Digimentors website. And as I mentioned earlier, we're also live on the Philadelphia Inquirer's Facebook and Twitter accounts. So Biyut, thank you for watching from Kolkata, India. Carla Baranakis, one of our producers, is watching from Jersey, wishing Emily a happy birthday. My daughter, thank you. Patricia Freudenberg is watching from New York. Lee Klontz is watching from Atlanta. Lee, a former guest on the show. Thank you so much. Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar saying happy birthday to my daughter. And she's glad we liked the Met Museum. We were in New York City on Friday. Naomi is saying hi from the Upper West Side. And Ken is just sharing his daughter got a master's from Villanova. I know that Mike follows Villanova very closely in terms of basketball. So thank you for sharing that, Mike. Sorry, Ken. So we're going to go ahead and continue with the show. We want to make sure that we give a shout out to our production team. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Let's see here. We have Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. They are, really the power behind this show. Whenever we do a show, at least on Sri's channels, on Facebook and LinkedIn in particular, we can put out links to various articles that we're talking about, add context, engage with the audience. So we certainly appreciate all of the work they're doing. We also would like to thank Muckrack for being a long-term sponsor of Sri's shows. So thank you, Muckrack. So with that, what I'd like to do is remind folks that our guest today is Mike Sielski. Mike is a sports columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer and author of The Rise, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality. So without further ado, let's bring on Mike Sielski. Mike, thank you for joining us.
Neil, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Absolutely. Thank you again. We want to spend some time talking to you about your book, of course. We want to talk a little bit about your work in general. And after that, we'll take a close look at the Inquirer, and you'll walk us through and I'll make some observations. You'll let us know if you have anything to add about any colleagues or particular stories, etc. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask you, we're marking 2 years with the pandemic since we all shut down in mid-March of 2020. This book came out last fall, I believe, or at the end of the year, right?
January of this year.
Or January this year, rather. Sorry.
That's okay.
Was this a pandemic project? How did the pandemic in general treat you? Hopefully healthy. Hopefully family and friends were okay. But tell us about your last 2 years, if you will.
Sure. Well, this is going to sound really terrible to say, and I hope everybody takes it in the way that I mean it. The pandemic, in some ways, turned out to be a benefit, particularly when it came to writing this book and the project in general. The entire world obviously shut down in March of 2020, and the sports world along with it. So I went from preparing to cover the 76ers and the Flyers as they were heading towards the playoffs. And that quickly was scuttled. And, we were reorganizing things at the Inquirer, trying to figure out who could cover what and how best to cover the pandemic and how best to cover sports when sports weren't going on. So at the time, I got moved out of my position as a sports columnist into more of kind of a feature writing position, uh, more on the news side of things. And I wasn't writing as frequently. Usually I write 3 to 4 columns a week for the Inquirer, and now I wasn't writing nearly that frequently. So between that move and just the reality of the pandemic itself, I had a lot of downtime. And, this was 2 months after Kobe's death on January 26, 2020. And I had been looking for a book project for a little while and talked to my agent one day and just kind of threw this out there like, hey, what about Kobe Bryant? What about his origin story? Instead of doing a full-fledged biography of him, given how much a part of the pop culture and how resonant his life had been at that time because he had just died. What if we tried a different spin, so to speak, and told his origin story? And my agent thought it was a terrific idea, and I reached out to a couple of people who had been close to Kobe when he was in high school, including his high school basketball coach, a guy named Greg Downer at Lower Merion High School. And I got their cooperation from those people, and I was off and running.
And talk a little bit about Kobe. I mean, in terms of focusing the story, let's take a step back and talk about Kobe Bryant as a transcendent figure in American culture. I mean, obviously, incredible sports star, incredible athlete, going directly from high school to the NBA. But particularly after his tragic death, can you talk about Kobe as a larger figure in American culture?
Yeah, and he was that, Neil. You hear the term now, Mamba mentality, and I think Kobe is kind of held up as an emblem, an example of the kind of person who knows what he or she wants to do at the earliest possible age, devotes him or herself to pursuing that goal, and then achieves that goal. And what makes him compelling, I think, is this idea that people feel like Kobe grew up before their eyes. He entered the NBA and joined the Los Angeles Lakers when he was only 17 years old, and then played 20 years with the Lakers, had this incredible basketball career, was in the public eye the entirety of that time, both because he entered the league at such a young age in such an unusual way, as you said, going straight from high school and turning professional without going to college, and then staying at the forefront of everybody's minds, whether it was for his excellence on the basketball court, whether it was for the controversies and, let's be frank, some of the scandals that were part of his life and part of his story. And then he stayed at the forefront of people's minds even after he died. Excuse me, even after he retired, because he branched out into film and storytelling and became a hashtag girl dad, to his 4 daughters, and was really still on everyone's minds right up until the moment that of the day of that tragic helicopter crash. So all of that was there, and I think the challenge in writing the book was telling a story about him that was fresh, that maybe people didn't know as much about. And I thought that the early years of his life, before he went out to Los Angeles, when he lived in Italy with his family because his father played professional basketball in Europe, when he was growing up in the suburban Philadelphia area, that whole period before he entered the NBA, to me, really appealed to me, and it was the part of his story that I knew best and felt I could tell best.
And again, so folks see it. The book is The Rise, and Ian O'Connor, who was a previous guest on the show about 2 months ago, uh, one of the most triumphant and tragic sports stories ever told. And we also have several other kudos as well in terms of the blurbs. What incredible insight into the rise of Kobe, captivating, a must read, Billy King. And then unique, meticulous, and rendered with clear-eyed insights. That's from Bob Costas, which is, as a baseball fan, Bob Costas is huge in my world. And then every superhero needs an origin story, a riveting study. Bravo, Jeff Pearlman. That's some high praise for the book, Mike. Great job. One of the things that we wanted to ask you about, and one of the things I didn't know about Kobe, is his upbringing in Italy. That you mentioned his father moved there after a basketball career here in the States. He moved to play basketball in Europe. And Kobe, up till what, high school, he was in Italy. When did he come back to the States?
He returned. The family returned to the States in early December of 1991. So Kobe was in eighth grade.
Eighth grade.
Yeah, at the time, and as I said, his father Joe had played in the NBA, had been a high school and college star in Philadelphia, and then kind of had a bit of a star-crossed career in the NBA. His career didn't quite turn out the way he would hope for a variety of reasons, and he ended up going to Italy to play for basically 8 years. And the family spent most of those years living in Italy, and then in the summertime would come back to the Philadelphia area to visit family and friends. And to me, this was a really key aspect of Kobe's story. One of the things that I wanted to get into in the book was kind of Kobe's search for his identity as a young man. You know, what did the experience of living abroad as a young black man, a black family in that environment, and then of course coming back to the Philadelphia area, the Lower Merion area is a pretty affluent area. It's very racially and socioeconomically diverse. So what was it like for him to kind of fall out of the sky as a 13-year-old and kind of plop down in this posh Philly suburb and adjust to life there? Because he hasn't had the upbringing that most of the other black kids in Lower Merion have had. He hasn't had the upbringing that most of the white kids have had. So how does he adjust to that? And how does that kind of foreshadow who he's going to become as a man, as an athlete, as the cultural figure we talked about? So that all of that to me was really fascinating, and I wanted to really get into as much detail and depth with it as I could.
Yeah, absolutely, and that makes Kobe, certainly a not just a Laker for folks who are familiar with his professional career, but a Philadelphia boy, a local boy. Lower Merion High School, right, is where he in Lower Merion is where he played, and we have some pictures of him early in his high school career. Um, Tell us a little bit about him as a high schooler. Uh, did he know? Did people around him know uh, how great he would become? Was it obvious from the start?
Well, he definitely knew how great he was going to become. He was telling classmates and friends in eighth and ninth grade that he was going to play in the NBA, and they kind of laughed at him for the most part. Yeah, yeah, Kobe, whatever you say. Um, but by the time he gets to the summer of 1995, which is the summer between his junior and senior years of high school, he's pretty certain that he's on track to play in the NBA. He's that good. And what's interesting about that time, of course, is that the internet isn't, it's in its infancy. It's this nascent thing that doesn't allow people in and around the Philadelphia area, or certainly outside the Philadelphia area, to have a real appreciation, I think, for how good Kobe was. A lot of his exploits up till that moment kind of spread by word of mouth. Kind of traveling on the wind. Hey, did you hear about this kid who plays at Lower Merion, and he seems like he's really good? And one of the things that kind of undercut the idea of Kobe being great at that young age was that he played at a suburban high school. So the perception was, the competition that he's facing at Lower Merion, the other schools that he's facing they aren't big time basketball programs. So how good can he possibly be if he's dominating these other suburban Philadelphia schools? And then that summer of 1995, the 76ers head coach at that time, a guy named John Lucas, was a former NBA player, was a friend of Kobe's father, and he invites Kobe to scrimmage and play pickup ball during that summer with members of the Sixers and other NBA and high-level college players. They play at St. Joseph's University, right on the edge of Lower Merion Township in West Philadelphia. And Kobe's playing against Jerry Stackhouse, who's the young star for the Sixers at the time, and several other NBA players who had been in the league for a long time, and he's holding his own and then some. And that summer is kind of the turning point for him. He realizes, not only am I an NBA player, but I can forget about college. I don't have to go. I can make the jump directly from high school to the NBA because even as a 16, 17-year-old kid, I'm scrimmaging against these pros and I'm doing just fine. Thank you very much. So that senior year of his is really an interesting look at kind of media coverage of high school sports because so much attention is paid to what Kobe's going to do, what his decision's going to be. And the fact was that Kobe had already made his mind up. He was kind of fooling everybody and playing along with the idea that, I might go to college, I might go here, there, wherever. But he knew in his heart and his mind he was going to jump directly to the NBA that entire time.
Got it. Got it. One of the questions we have from our audience takes it back a little bit in terms of the story. Miriam Berkeley is asking whether he spoke Italian. Can you speak to what role his Italian culture played in Kobe's life, and how was he received in Italy? After he left during his career, etc.
Yes, well, he spoke Italian fluently, and it's funny. He, you could tell that whenever he spoke about Italy or even, said his daughter's names. I mean, his daughter Gianna, who also tragically died with him in that helicopter crash. He had another daughter, Natalia. When he said their names, he rolled the R's and you could hear that accent. And I think in terms of shaping him, what it did was kind of it made it a tiny bit easier, I think, for him to adjust to American culture and Lower Merion Township and the kind of milieu he was in at that time, because he was a little bit accustomed to being a fish out of water, right? Like he didn't have this kind of homogenous upbringing where he knew only people who looked like him or acted like him or were raised the same way he was. He and his sisters were very close. The family was kind of this very tight unit while they were living in Italy. It was his mother and father, Joe and Pam, and he had two older sisters, Sharia and Shea, and they were very, very close living in Italy, primarily because they didn't encounter anyone who looked like them or, had the same sort of upbringing that they did in the Philadelphia area, certainly for Joe and Pam. So I think once the family moved back to Lower Merion, that upbringing really allowed him to kind of move in different social circles and very quickly get accustomed to the fact that he wasn't like everybody else. He didn't grow up in the same way that everybody in Lower Merion did, and he kind of had a training ground for that living in Italy. So he didn't have a really close core group of friends in high school. He, as I said, he was kind of able to move in and out of social circles, depending on who he needed to hang out with, who he wanted to hang out with, whether it was the basketball players, whether it was the students who were in his honors English class, whether it was the students who liked rap music and, would go to clubs in and around Philadelphia to hear rap music and to rap themselves. So, he was kind of diverse in his own social experiences as well.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things I want to ask you about in terms of the book, and a reminder for folks, if you're watching on Facebook, please make sure to press play on the video. You might be seeing the feed in your timeline. If it got your attention, and if you're watching, press play so we can see your comments. We would love to be able to put your comments on the screen. And also for folks who are maybe watching on Twitter, just know that with the platform we're using, we can't actually see your comments. So if you do want to put your comments on screen, you'd have to switch to Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. So just a quick PSA there. Mike, I wanted to ask you in terms of the book and the research that you did. I mean, you dug back into, you had recordings of Kobe when he was in high school. You interviewed former coaches and peers of his. Was there something that stood out for you that just surprised you? That you went into the book, you have to know a little bit about Kobe's upbringing and maybe the basic tent poles. But as you did the research, were there one or two things that just like left you, speechless in terms of what you found out?
There were, Neil. I don't think I had an appreciation. As much as you hear the phrase Mamba mentality, and as much as Kobe was kind of recognized and acknowledged to be an athlete supremely dedicated to his craft, to the
Hmm.
point where it probably, almost certainly, damaged social relationships and personal relationships that he had, whether it was teammates, interacting with other people, the way he acted away from the court. Um, to see someone who was that supremely dedicated, and particularly at such an early age, I didn't have an appreciation for how devoted he was so young. It wasn't like this just clicked on for him when he was 14, 15 years old. This was Tiger Woods like. This was somebody who both had it within himself, kind of intrinsically, to push himself to be great, and also was in an environment and kind of was groomed in some ways to be great. His father was a pro athlete, a pro basketball player. His mother was raised devoutly Catholic, and kind of inculcated that family with that sense of discipline, with that sense of kind of searching for things beyond just whatever your pursuit or passion happened to be. And Kobe had all of that at an early age, and was willing and able at an early age to put himself in positions and situations that he perceived would make himself great, at an age that you don't think about such things. I'll give you an example. He had a close friend who was a couple of years older than he was, named Anthony Gilbert. Kobe had met him through his sisters. Anthony was a student at Temple at the same time that Kobe's sister Sharia was. So he and Kobe got to be close. Anthony was a bit like an older brother to him. And the two of them would drive around to basketball courts and playgrounds in and around the city of Philadelphia to play ball. But they played a very unique brand of basketball. It was just the two of them. And Anthony, when they would play, would have two jobs. Number one, he was to rebound all of Kobe's shots while Kobe was working on his footwork and shooting 3-pointers and dunking and working on pull up jump shots and all that kind of stuff. Anthony would just grab the ball, pass it back to him. The other thing that Anthony would do is he would yell at him. And Kobe wanted him to do this. He would scream things at him like, "You're soft. You go to a white school. You couldn't play in the Philadelphia Public League." Screaming these things at him while Kobe was shooting and working on his game. And Kobe wanted him to do this to try to, this was Kobe's kind of putting on emotional chainmail and armor, to try to prepare himself and gird himself for the kind of trash talking and tactics that he was already facing as a high school athlete, and that he knew he would face when he was in the NBA. There's a very famous video of Kobe standing in front of an NBA player, Matt Barnes, as Barnes is going to inbound the basketball. He's going to pass it into a teammate. And Barnes fakes as if he's going to throw it at Kobe's face. And Kobe never flinches. And
Wow.
anytime I see that clip, I think of Anthony Gilbert screaming at Kobe back when Kobe is 14, 15 years old. And it's impossible not to make the connection between the two.
Can you imagine, sitting there working on a column and asking someone to yell at you in terms of, watch for typos and your grammar's bad and you're not following AP style. What are you doing? You're a hack. That just blows my mind in terms of
I'll tell you,
training.
Neil, if you cover Philadelphia sports, sometimes you kind of hear those things. I got to be honest.
Philadelphia
Um,
sports.
yes, yes, it's not just sports around here; it's civic religion.
Absolutely, and as a sports fan, and particularly for me, a baseball fan, the one thing I can tell you that we can have a civil conversation today because I'm not a Mets fan. I'm a Yankees fan, so we don't have to worry about the Mets Philly thing. Um, but
Yeah,
yes,
big series coming up this week, actually, between the Mets and the Phillies. Yeah.
exactly. But Philly sports fans are known for being very passionate. I think is one way of putting it. Tell us about, so getting beyond the book, you're a sports columnist. You cover baseball, football, hockey, basketball, obviously. Is this what you always wanted to do? Were you always a sports guy growing up? Did you play sports? How did you fall into this role?
Yeah, so growing up, I read the Inquirer every day. I love the sports
You're local.
page. Yeah, I mean, I grew up just outside the city. I went to LaSalle University as an undergrad, and then went on to Columbia's graduate school. Shout out to my classmate Lee Klontz, who you
Yeah,
introduced ahead of time. We graduated
absolutely.
together from Columbia. But yeah, as a kid, I love sports in all its forms. My mother uh, is a retired school teacher. My father was an English major before he got into law enforcement. So words mattered in my family a lot. And when I was growing up, I wanted to be Bill Lyon, who was the lead sports columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And when I was in college at LaSalle, I was fortunate enough to meet Bill, and he kind of took me under his wing and became kind of my mentor. And I just worked my way up. It's interesting to me. I feel like I'm kind of part of the last generation. I'm 46 years old. I'm part of the last generation of journalists and writers who could use the newspaper ladder or pipeline to kind of climb up to get to where he or she wanted to go as a reporter or a columnist. I started out at my local daily in Bucks and Montgomery counties, in and around the city, covering high school sports, and worked my way up from there. Eventually got a job at the Wall Street Journal in 2010, when the Journal formed the Greater New York section. So I spent 3 years at the Journal, covering the Mets and covering the New York Jets, and getting some interesting emails. I covered the Jets at the time that Rex Ryan was their head coach. This was back in 2012. And I would get emails from Journal readers like, hey, is Rex Ryan related to Paul Ryan? So it was a different kind of audience that was experiencing sports coverage at the Wall Street Journal than the kind of audience I have now, covering Philadelphia sports for the Inquirer. And I got hired at the Inquirer in 2013, and as much as I love the Journal and as great as it was to work in New York, I had to come back. It was my dream job to be the columnist at the Inquirer.
And I'll say, for our regular viewers, we don't usually go into depth with sports. We've had several sports writers on the show, Claire Smith in particular, George Vesey, Bill Roden, John Branch, some legends from the Times. Excuse me, Neil Amdur as well. Um, so that question of Rex Ryan, Buddy Ryan, certainly for some of our viewers, they may be, what's the guy talking about? We're not really sure. But I think the interesting thing is to approach, how is sports writing similar or different to covering other beats? What would you say to that?
I think it's very similar if it's being done correctly. You are, we say it all the time, to be honest, that, the most important, or I don't know if we would say important, depends how you define it, but in some ways, the most challenging beat at the Philadelphia Inquirer are those writers at the paper and at the website who cover the Philadelphia Eagles, because it matters so much to people here. And, you're dealing with news every day. Who's going to play, what's happening with the starting quarterback, what's happening with the coach, who's the opponent this week. And you're writing on deadline every day. Sports people always chuckle at that newsroom tradition on election night that the entire newsroom gets pizza, because the reporters who cover elections are working diligently right up until the very end of deadline. Sports writers do that every single day because most of the events are at night, and we're writing right up against the deadline. If the Eagles are playing on a Monday night football game, I'm filing my column the instant that the game ends, if not sooner, if I can. So it's very rigorous if it's done correctly, and some of we could take this discussion in a million different directions about the nature of media nowadays, and how news sites and TV stations and things like that try to capture and hold on to an audience. But sports is one of those rare things in our society anymore that cuts across demographics in a way that few other things do. And when it comes to sports in the Philadelphia region, doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter race, gender, any of that sort of stuff. If you love the Eagles or you love the Phillies, you're gonna want to read about them, and that makes it fun, that makes it exciting, and it makes it very challenging.
Sure. You mentioned Bill Lyon earlier. One of our viewers on Twitter, Will Sutton, says loves Bill Lyon so much I had to visit Gary after I left Philly to help lead that newsroom. What a reporter, what a writer, what a pro, what a man. Will Sutton sharing that, replying to the live stream on Twitter. So that's some great praise. And then we have some questions that have come in from our audience. You mentioned Lee Klontz. He's doing you a solid. What process and software tools did you use to organize all of your reporting material and actually write the book? Let's talk about your process a little bit.
Sure. Well, I'm not in my office right now, but if I were, I would turn my laptop and show you the stacks of manila envelopes and folders that I have where I kind of stored and organized all my research for the book.
Oh, hard copy.
Yeah. I'm very much in a hard copy. I mean, obviously, I used Google Docs and things like that, and uh, I would do an interview, for instance, with a source, whether it was one of Kobe's coaches, friends, teammates. Record the interview, transcribe the whole thing, and then go through and create Google documents, basically for each chapter. I would have and I had the advantage, obviously, of the early part of Kobe's life is basically a straight chronological story. So I was mindful of narrative threads. Here's the season, his senior year. What does the team do? The narrative thread about his decision to jump straight from high school to the NBA, everything that was related to that. And I kind of organized the Google documents under those topics and for each of those chapters. I knew what each chapter was going to deal with, kind of volleying, back and forth between those narratives. And then, I looked at it much more. I look at writing a project like this, whether it's a book or, a long narrative piece for the Inquirer, less as a creative process than as a piece of labor, like you're building something. And you have to have the foundations, you have to have the bricks, you have to be able to build the structure, whether it's from insights that you get from an interview, whether it's information that I gleaned from going through old newspaper articles and archival material. And I just organized it by topic and then eventually organized it, whether it was in the file folders or in the Google Docs, by subject, and then, kind of worked from there. I don't sit down and just start writing. I kind of need to have that research in front of me to know, okay, here's a really good quote, or here's a really good piece of information that I know is going to go in this chapter. Let me start with that. And that might be 65 words, but okay. And psychologically, that gets me going. And then I'm able to start writing and kind of building the chapter or the piece of writing around that information or that insight.
That's great. Carla Baranakis, one of our producers, has a question with the post-pandemic focus on mental health for athletes. Do you think we'll continue to see kids becoming as devoted to their sports as early as Kobe, Tiger, and the Williams sisters? Will we see another, biography of a super athlete years from now, focusing just on their high school years, like you did with Kobe?
That's a really interesting question, Carla, because you have two trends in kind of opposition to each other. One is, as Carla points out, is the increased focus on mental health, which obviously is so important. It's become, an issue and a subject that if you cover sports, whether it's professional sports, college, you have to deal with it because so many athletes themselves are dealing with it. We had two members of the Philadelphia Eagles, Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks, both admitted to dealing with mental health issues and were very open about that. The other opposing force to that, though, is the trend, and this has been true for a while now, the trend of specialization in youth sports, where a young athlete decides or has decided for him or her that this is the sport that they're going to focus on, whether it's the Williams sisters with tennis, whether it's Tiger Woods with golf. And there's a real debate, I think, if you are familiar at all with the topic. There was a discussion that took place a couple of years ago between Malcolm Gladwell and David Epstein, an author, and they kind of approached this subject from, opposing viewpoints. Gladwell kind of came at it from the 10,000 hours theory that you have to spend 10,000 hours doing something to become proficient at it. And Epstein comes at it from the perspective of, no, you don't. You need to diversify your skills as much as you can. Take an athlete like Roger Federer, the great tennis player, who was skilled and adept at several different sports when he was young, and then kind of settled on tennis after a while. So those two trends, the accidental mental health and the specialization, are really kind of, if you think about it, on a collision course here. And I think that's something that those of us who cover sports are really going to have to be mindful of in the years to come. Is that specialization a threat or a challenge in some ways to the mental health of elite athletes? Are they better off staying as diverse in their careers as young as possible? It's very easy for someone like me to be able to play soccer in the fall and baseball in the spring and basketball in the winter when I was young, because the community leagues and the kind of the infrastructure of youth sports was set up that way. That's not really the case anymore. Kids and their parents are kind of in some ways forced to choose. And if you're really, really proficient at a particular sport, you're going to devote yourself to that sport, whether you end up in the NBA or on the PGA Tour or playing at Wimbledon or not.
Paula weighs in. Yes, I think the specialization trend is so important to look at. There's an intangible component of life and personal spirit that kids are at risk of losing if they don't have some free time and ability to try different things. So I think that is really something that we're going to be taking a closer look at, I'm sure. Emily, watching from Philadelphia, Wayne Gretzky is a major advocate for kids playing other sports. And Ken Fisher gives Paula an amen for her comments. So I think we might have touched on something. Thank you, Carla, for bringing that up. These last 2 years have certainly changed the way we look at all aspects of our life, right? Not just our social interactions, our physical spaces, cleanliness habits. Someone who washed their hands several times a day, 2.5 years ago, would be seen as maybe a little compulsive, a little bit OCD, and someone wearing a mask might be, what's wrong with them? What do they have that they don't want to share? But this is normalizing some of this behavior, and I think this approach to sports and mental health could be another option. Paula also adds she had a daughter in gymnastics and dance for years. There are also effects on their bodies, the physical aspects of that.
Yeah, and I think one of the aspects that is going to be really interesting to see how it plays out in years to come is that sense of socialization and community that can come from youth sports. We've had 2 years now where so many kids and so many adults too, of course, haven't been out and about, haven't been interacting with each other. What are the ramifications of schools having been closed as long as they were closed, and local community sports leagues not being able to hold games or contests or things like that. That was, to me as a kid growing up in the 1980s, that was the huge value of sports. None of us thought that we were going to play for the Phillies or the Yankees or anything like that, but it was a chance to just hang out with your kids with your friends in the neighborhood and do something kind of together. And I wonder if there's going to be a movement to kind of get back to something close to that. There's a lot of other factors that play into that: the cost of higher education and the perception that focusing on sports can lead to a college scholarship, something like that. The perception that, I have 2 sons myself, and who are 10 and 7, and the pressure to get them involved in something, and the benefits of that too. Do you have a thing? Do you have a thing that you do, whether it's sports, whether it's piano lessons, whatever the case may be? So there's a lot going on there. It's really a fascinating topic.
Emily says it's also very difficult to find recreational teams for kids in middle and high school. I'm assuming that's a lot of the focus is on travel teams and more kind of a higher level of sport. I'll admit, with my daughter is 9, just kind of in between your children's ages. We haven't really had to deal with that yet. She's done a little bit of running here and there with some like school clubs, but we haven't looked at sports as such. Her schedule makes it difficult. She gets home at 5 off the bus, so after school activities are difficult. But I can see how that's going to be an issue as she gets older, and what she gets involved in.
My older son is 10 years old, and for a year now He's been involved in fencing. The
Fencing.
Star Wars movies and The Princess Bride. Yeah, we watched them as a family during the pandemic, and he decided to give this a try, and he's been at it for a year, and he really enjoys it. And we don't need him to go to the Olympics or anything like that. It's just something that he enjoys, and all things, God willing, I guess it's a pastime and a hobby that hopefully he'll have for a long time to come.
Sure. And Emily is clarifying, and that's why my assumption was too. Recreation, not as in a travel team, but for enjoyment. When I was in high school, I played soccer in high school. Also played in at least in the Northeast, AYSO, all youth soccer organization, I think, which was just local. So that was a nice Saturday, Saturday plans for us. So I want to remind folks that we're producing this show in partnership with Inquirer Live. I want to give a shout out to everyone watching on the Philadelphia Inquirer's Facebook and Twitter accounts. This is a special Sri special Inky read along. Usually we do a show on Sunday mornings called the New York Times read along, focusing on the New York Times. But our guest this week is Mike Sielski from the Inquirer, and we are thrilled to be talking about sports and his work, his book on Kobe Bryant, the rise, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality. Mike, of course, is a sports columnist at the Philadelphia Inquirer. So, Mike, we are going to move to the paper in just a minute, but we do have a question for you that is, I think probably one of the more important questions that we're going to be asking, particularly for our audience outside of Philadelphia. And folks, if you're in Philadelphia and watching, try not to laugh too much. What is this? Can you? What are we looking at here? How did this come about? What? Just help me understand this, please.
So, for those of you who haven't met him, this is Gritty. Gritty is the mascot of the Philadelphia Flyers, the National Hockey League franchise in Philadelphia. And he has become, I guess, something you would call a cultural touchstone for people in Philadelphia, for people not from Philadelphia. If you're a fan of Saturday Night Live, you've seen Gritty pop up on a skit or two there, I think in a parody of the HBO show Mayor of Easttown. The Flyers have been kind of a mediocre franchise for the better part of 10, 12 years now. And they've been trying different things to try to generate, re-energize the franchise, regenerate interest in the team. And what's interesting about that is that for a long time, they had a very strong identity. Their fan base was very loyal. If you know anything about hockey, you know that the nickname of the franchise is the Broad Street Bullies. They were the hockey team that kind of really popularized fighting and really rugged play in the mid-1970s. It was the way that the Flyers won their two championships, their two Stanley Cups in 1974 and 75. And the franchise has kind of fallen on hard times lately. And in trying to kind of re-energize the franchise and interest in it and to kind of diversify their fan base beyond just hardcore hockey fans, they created Gritty. And gritty is a word that is used to describe the Flyers as a franchise. They took a lot of pride in that. We're gritty, we're gutty, we play hard. And then they created this orange monstrosity. And he's become, honestly, the most popular thing about the franchise. People took to the mascot in the same way that baseball fans have taken to the Philly Fanatic over the last 40 years. I think it's a point of pride for people in and around Philadelphia that we have the two most popular mascots in sports in our town. And, I wish there were, Neil, I wish there were a way logically to explain this, but there just isn't. There's something about a giant monster with big eyes and orange hair that people are drawn to, I suppose.
Patricia calls him cute and gritty, assuming it's a him. I don't want to make any assumptions about Gritty.
I don't know how Gritty identifies. I don't. I just it's Gritty. That's it.
We want to keep it neutral there. And you mentioned is it a monster? What is Gritty?
It's humanoid. It looks a bit like Cousin It from the Addams Family, except that I don't think Cousin It had eyes. Um, but it's become this thing. It's become Philadelphia as a community kind of likes to rally around certain things. When the Eagles won the Super Bowl a few years ago, one of their players during the championship parade, Jason Kelsey, had a line during a speech he gave. He said, nobody likes us and we don't care. And people, Eagles fans, football fans, and people of Philadelphia rallied around that line like, yeah, nobody likes us. Well, actually, the opposite is really true. Philadelphia in general cares very much what people who are not from Philadelphia think of
Of course.
Philadelphia and its teams and things like
Of
that.
course.
It's been described as kind of this cultural inferiority complex. It's a very interesting dynamic. I don't know if it's because the city is located between New York and Washington, D.C., between the political capital of the world and the cultural financial capital of the world. And we're kind of in between them. And, sports really matters to us. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, it's led to Gritty becoming, he could run for mayor right now and he'd win the election, I think.
He might win. Patricia said he's might be a Muppet's cousin. But that's good to know that Gritty is popular in Philadelphia. That it wasn't something that's being derided locally. Curious if Emily, Silverman, or Apollo have any thoughts as Philadelphia residents watching the show. We certainly would welcome your thoughts on Gritty. But Mike, thank you very much for helping to explain that to our audience. We definitely.
Neil, as much as it can be explained, I did my best.
Have you read any columns about Grady? I'm just curious.
I have not. No.
Mike,
I'm kind of
missing.
You know what, Neil? When it comes to the Flyers in particular, I view my job as a columnist kind of to be the person who looks at the beautiful Christmas tree and says, you know what, the star atop is a little askew. Did you notice that? And I tend to be that way with the Flyers in particular. The Flyers have as I said, very loyal fan base. The coverage of them tends not to be as critical as it is of some other teams, and I try to play it down the middle as best I can. So I haven't written about Gritty. I tend to stick to what's happening on the ice and in the front office and things like that. But eventually, I'm going to have to write about Gritty, I think, at some point.
You might have to. Marianne Libby is endorsing the Gritty for mayor idea. Marianne, I'm guessing you might be watching on the Philadelphia Inquirer Facebook page, unless you're watching on Sree's page. Thank you for joining us. Again, we're live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, our Digimentors website, the Philadelphia Inquirer Facebook page and Twitter accounts. And this is being produced in partnership with Inquirer Live. Emily says that her take is that it was locally questioned until others came after Gritty, and that prompted and secured the love. Exactly what you were saying. That's interesting.
It is. It's kind of like the dynamic of a big family. I can call my brother a jerk, but somebody else from outside the family can't call my brother a jerk, or I'll beat them up. And that's kind of Philly in a nutshell.
I get that. And Patricia's endorsing my idea about a column about Gritty. I'm sure that you could write a serious article about Gritty, looking at the team, looking at its role in the community. I mean, maybe a little tongue in cheek, but I'm sure there's some serious angles you can come up with, Mike.
There absolutely are, Neil, and I think it's again, that comes back to the nature of kind of sports coverage, right? You can approach it any number of ways, kind of with a lighthearted touch. You could make an argument that, hey, this kind of shows the state of the Flyers right now, that their most popular figure is the mascot. That doesn't speak well of where they are as an organization in terms of putting a quality product on the ice every night.
That would certainly be a critical column of the team. I hope you don't get batteries thrown at you the next time you're walking down the street there.
I'll tell you a quick anecdote, and I apologize for. I'll clean it up as much as I can. But a week into my job, after I got hired at the Inquirer, I wrote a column about the Flyers that was critical of the team. And within 10 minutes of that column going online, I got an email from a Flyers fan who wished that another writer would defecate on my chest. Yes, blank on my chest. So once you get an email like that, kind of right out of the chute, anything that comes after that is easy to deal with.
That's good to know, and I'm sure you've gotten a lot of positive emails as well.
Yeah, but the negative ones are more memorable.
Of course, certainly. Again, thank you for sharing all that with us. Our guest has been Mike Sielski. We're talking about his book about Kobe Bryant. We're talking about Philadelphia sports, kids sports in particular. Great discussion there, and of course, Gritty, the Flyers mascot. We're going to shift gears a little bit now and talk about the newspaper. We're going to share the Inquirer, the hard copy, the PDF of the Inquirer, and walk through it a little bit. And we will see, talk about what we do with the show. Usually we'll look at the graphics, the layout, the photos, talk about the coverage. Mike, if there are particular stories that you have a connection to, or can say something, offer any background about colleagues, that have bylines, feel free to jump in. We certainly would love to hear it. So we will jump in there. And so the front page has this major story, and it's part of a longer series called A More Perfect Union. This is Scars and Stripes. We'll get to it in a second. We'll on the jump, we'll look at the details. But this is a really interesting examination of some of the institutions that started in Philadelphia, and how they spread around the country, but looking at their origins and their impact on race, etc. in Philadelphia. So we'll definitely take a look at that. This particular story revisits some icons of American history, including the flag and the Liberty Bell, and then asked local artists to offer their own reimagining of these icons. So we'll take a look. Of course, the lead story on the top right: Ukraine girds for Eastern assault. Coverage of the war in Ukraine. Pennsylvania unlikely as Europe's energy fix. And then another story, two more stories on the bottom of the front page: surviving the COVID storm. Have Philly restaurants and the people in them changed? Certainly an important story that's being told around the country. And alarm rises as a drug takes hold in the city. Mike, what's your take in terms of just focusing on the COVID story for a moment? Philadelphia is opening up again. Are people back in the streets, going to museums, restaurants, etc., or is it a little bit? Is there some hesitancy still? What about schools in particular?
Schools are just opening back up. I think the hesitancy is starting to kind of wean away a little bit. It's like all the other big cities in the country, right? Whether it's New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, COVID concern was very, very high in Philadelphia. It was, I think it's fair to say, kind of the top priority of the city government, and it's just starting to kind of get back to normal. I think there's for what I do in terms of covering sports. The restrictions have been relaxed. For a while there, you had to wear a mask inside the Wells Fargo Center. You had to be masked in the press box at Lincoln Financial Field for an Eagles game, things like that. And obviously, over time, those sorts of things relaxed as the leagues themselves and the city, started to push back to something closer to normal life. It's been one of the big issues I think that's come up in Philadelphia has been how do you, with respect to the schools, how do you balance the need to protect against COVID versus the vital role that these schools play in the lives of so many children within the city? That the schools are a stabilizing factor in their lives. It's where some of them get meals and things like that. And, how do you balance those two kind of competing, interests in terms of, we need to have the schools open, but we also need to guard against this deadly virus.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that perspective. Appreciate it. Let's take a look at next. There we go. So the 2-page spread. This is looking at the drug issue that was referenced on the front page. let's go down. Sorry about that. Navigating the PDF. It's the nation and world story. It's on the inside. Week highlights Congress's partisan path and anti-LGBTQ bills flooding states. Obviously, Texas started this off. There was also 3 killed in a shooting at a gun range in Georgia. This is the story I was talking about in terms of this drug problem. And there's a for spring breakers in Florida, warnings and Narcan. Sorry about that. A little bit challenging with the PDF, so my apologies on that. Let's see here. There we go. And then this zero COVID taking a toll in Shanghai, and then a jump on the restaurants. And so now we see this this cover. It's interesting in terms of the layout. Obviously, looking at the PDF, it's a little bit different, but there's this inside page that almost looks like a section front for A More Perfect Union, which is that special series I was talking about earlier. And 5 local artists reimagine American symbols that started right here in Philly. And then plus a historian, Martha Jones, goes to Betsy Ross's house and unlearns the myth of the American flag. So let's take a look at what we're doing here. For this first one, what's interesting is this first image that you see in the top right is actually a reimagining of the Liberty Bell, which, you know, from reading the article ahead of time, it had its origins obviously around independence. It took on greater meaning after the Civil War, but there are questions about the actual, you know, depth of the meaning of liberty in the inscription rather. The person who had the inscription was a slaveholder himself, and this reimagining is actually a bell, almost as a gag on presumably you know, either a slave or someone who was black, and then the ropes represent the bondage of slavery. It's really interesting. You know, this is part of a larger project that the Inquirer is doing in taking a look at some local institutions and the kind of underlying issues around race there. So we definitely want to take a look at the next piece. So on the left is what you might not be able to tell what that is. That's a sousaphone, apparently invented in Philadelphia. John Philip Sousa, a lot of you know, marching band music and patriotic music. But this was just reimagined with the inspiration from drum lines and HBCUs and marching bands, just loud and brassy, that type of thing. On the right, you see a Stetson hat. Apparently, the Stetson was invented in Philadelphia, or at least manufactured there for a number of years. And you know, the way again that the article talks about it, they focus on the idea of the Stetson being a you know, symbol of the American West, and you know, the impact that it had on indigenous peoples. It was for white people. This is clearly, you know, reimagining it with more Mexican roots in terms of the design and the materials, etc. So certainly interesting in terms of the way they approach that. Moving on, this last one is, or second to last rather, this is the famous image about the kite and the key, Ben Franklin and his experiments with electricity, flying a kite, etc. But instead of focusing on Ben Franklin as in more traditional imagery, they focused on 2 women and this idea of grabbing the kite by the hands and being a little bit more engaged, a little bit more fierce, being rewritten into history. This last one, which I think is even more interesting, is, and I want to see, it's actually on the cover, so we'll go back there, is the reimagining of the flag. the angle that you can't see. The artist, this fashion designer, went away from the red, white, and blue. Still has 13 stripes down the middle, but they represent the 13th Amendment in her rendering, and just approached it in a very different way. So just interesting to rethink institutions and imagery that we're very used to in this country. I know that this series is certainly something that is raising a lot of questions, a lot of good things to you know to consider, to challenge our assumptions about. So I definitely encourage folks to learn more about this series that they're doing. There is also an Inquirer Live coming up later this week, Scars and Stripes, on April 13th at 4:15 p.m. Aaron Hayes and Martha Jones will be discussing this specific topic. So I certainly encourage you to check that out. So let's look at some of the other stories, Mike. Some international stories. Macron facing surging rival in France. This story about Pennsylvania Natural Gas may not come to Europe's rescue. And then this piece at close range, war in Ukraine. A lot of international coverage in the Inquirer. This is the horrors. I'm not sure how to pronounce Bucha in Ukraine. What Mike, can you tell us about the coverage of the war in Philadelphia, but particularly in terms of, is there a large Ukrainian community in Philly? What has local response been like?
Yeah, there's a decently sized Ukrainian community in kind of the northeast sections of the city. Pardon me, excuse me. Yeah, and it's been something that it's a topic. It's a topic everywhere, and it's a topic in Philly as much as it's going to be in any kind of major metropolitan area in the country. For that reason, as I said, there is a Ukrainian community kind of in the north, predominantly in the northeast areas of the city. And for our part at the Inquirer, we're still to a great degree kind of the news source for so many people in the city and kind of around the city as well. So, that's a big reason why we have so much foreign coverage and coverage of the war in particular in the paper. We don't have obviously Richard Ben Kramer covering the Middle East for us anymore, as we did in the late 1970s. But we're doing what we can when it comes to mining the best coverage of the situation in Ukraine and the war, and letting our readers know what's going on.
Absolutely. Here is another story, and right on cue, rolling out welcome mats with a sizable Ukrainian community here. Philly is likely main landing area for war refugees. So that's always good to see. And we're seeing some additional articles here. Let's see, and then suspect in slaying at gas station. This piece about a costume party. Baseball's back, Philly, and are you ready for bases loaded, bottom of the ninth? Here comes the pitch action. Get a Philly loaded preview. Did you work on the preview for the Phillies? It came out last week, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I actually didn't this year, only because I was kind of consumed with March Madness, and particularly with Villanova. They made the Final Four, and they won the Big East Tournament Championship. So I actually spent most of March. I bounced from a few nights in New York covering the Big East Tournament to several nights in Pittsburgh, to several nights in San Antonio, to several nights in New Orleans. So when I finally got home on a Tuesday afternoon, I was very happy to see my wife and two sons. I had not seen much of them over the course of March.
I'm sure. I think we skipped a page there. My apologies.
That's okay.
It's reading the file. There we go. Let's see. There's the Philly page, and then we have an obit, Stanley Siegel, 91, expert in food science. And then the paid obits, the funeral announcements, and then job listings, which is, it's good to see classifieds in a newspaper. certainly for a number of years, the lifeblood in terms of revenue. And now we get to the sports pages. Controlled chaos from a rink to woohoo, exactly, from a rink to a court in just a few hours. I'll say that I had my own experience with this. Again, this is a New York reference, but Friday night I was at a Billy Joel concert at Madison Square Garden, and it was interesting to see the Rangers banners from the rafters, and obviously Knick banners as well, to see how these arenas transform.
The Knicks have banners.
Well, just it says Knick. It doesn't say anything about
Okay.
winning. But to know how they transform a arena like that from a concert venue to ice hockey to basketball, etc. That's always interesting.
Yeah,
This,
and I think just not to interrupt, Neil, I think
yeah, please.
that story kind of gets to the heart of one of the challenges, I think, in not just in sports journalism nowadays, but journalism as a whole, which is to say, who is your coverage for, right? Like that's a story that the average fan, whether you like the Sixers or the Knicks or the Flyers or the Rangers or whatever, might be asking him or herself, like, how do they do that? How do they change over, from the rink to the basketball court, or the basketball court to the rink? So you have that kind of piece. And then, of course, when it comes to whatever topic you're talking about, whether it's politics, local news, sports, so much of that coverage nowadays is geared toward those people who are already immersed in it and who, love it or are consumed by it and want more data about it or more insights. And, in the case of sports teams, they feel like they want to be the coach or the general manager. So there's that to me is one of kind of the primary challenges of journalism nowadays, is figuring out who are you writing and covering things for. Well, who is your audience? Are you trying to reach as many people as possible? Are you trying to retain the audience you already have? Are you trying to get the people who are most into whatever it is that you're covering? It's one of those things I think a lot of media organizations are grappling with.
That's certainly interesting. I'm curious, Mike, in terms of your columns specifically. Do you, when you write them, does the audience change in your mind based on that day, that topic? Are you generally trying to approach it in a consistent way? Because I could see a lot of sports writing. I mean, sports writing in general isn't necessarily about box scores and kind of the inside basketball, baseball, etc. Some sports writing is just incredible writing that anyone can appreciate, whether it's a profile of an athlete, etc., of a coach. Who are you writing for?
I try to envision a casual but passionate sports fan. I do think that I'm not somebody who's going to get too deeply into the minutia of a particular sport or a particular team. I think you can turn readers off. I think there are fans and people who follow sports that closely, but I think you can lose sight of people who just like the Phillies because they love watching baseball and they don't know very many statistics beyond a player's batting average or how many strikeouts a pitcher might have. And they might watch an Eagles game every Sunday and they care very much about the team, but they don't particularly care who the backup left tackle is. So I'm trying to do two things. I'm trying to reach as wide an audience as I can, while at the same time showing that I'm knowledgeable in the particular sport and writing intelligently about it. And I'm often trying to look at things from a slightly different perspective. Maybe it's taking a step back and reframing an issue, or it's, as I kind of referenced earlier, maybe being the guy who says, hey, have you thought about it from this perspective? We all kind of take for granted that this is what's happening, or this is the good thing, and maybe it's not so good, or maybe this isn't what's really happening. And so I want to combine that kind of, wider swath of readers and fans and news consumers that I'm trying to reach, and make it so that they may not be 100%. I don't want to be 100% predictable. I don't want to be somebody who, oh, I know what Sielski's going to say about this. I want to be somebody who goes, oh, I want to hear what Sielski has to say, because he's interesting or he takes a different viewpoint on things.
And what would you say um, in terms of the people who write in, who comment on your columns? Do you get people from a particular perspective? I mean, is all the feedback from the passionate fans, or do you get more general feedback?
Well, I certainly get the feedback from the passionate fans, but I like the fact that I often get feedback from readers who happen to stumble across my a column or a story, who say, I'm not a big sports fan, but you hooked me with this story. I did a piece earlier this year, a very lengthy piece, about 6,500 words, about a former basketball player at Lower Merion High School who was supposed to be kind of Kobe before Kobe. He
Yeah,
was going to be the
yeah,
star, and things didn't work out. His life kind of took a different turn. And I like stories like that because you don't necessarily have to be intimately familiar with even the rules of basketball to read that story. And if I've presented it the right way and told it the right way, find it compelling. And so I try to do that as much as the opportunities present themselves. I like, as much as I like weighing in on the issues of the day when it comes to Philadelphia or national sports, I like storytelling even more than that.
sure, absolutely. Um, really appreciate that, and looking to see if I could find that article that you mentioned. What was the athlete's name again?
His name was Sultan Shabazz, and
That's right.
yeah, he was, as I said, he was a couple years ahead of Kobe at Lower Merion, and he ended up, taking a different turn in his life. Sold drugs for a while, really had a rough go of it, and has since turned himself around. And that sort of story to me is what's really interesting. There was a piece, for instance, that came out last week in Sports Illustrated, by Jeff Pearlman, who is a New York Times best-selling author, and it was
Yeah.
ostensibly about a car crash involving a Las Vegas Raiders football player named Henry Suggs. But Jeff turned it into a story about a man who came across the crash's aftermath, and he told that story about the man who tried to help and rescue the victim in the car crash. And it was a much more compelling story in a way for the angle that Jeff took on it. And I really recommend it to anybody who's out there who just loves good storytelling.
And here's the piece that you did on Sultan Shabazz. I'm showing the video without bringing the sound. I thought it was interesting. Not a lot of your columns have a video piece to it. How did this come together? Was this a special feature? Did you tell us a little bit about the piece itself?
Sure. Well, I had been working on this one for a while. I actually met Sultan while doing my research for the book about Kobe, and his story was so compelling, and the life he had lived was so compelling that rather than try to shoehorn it into the book and take the narrative of the book on this completely different direction to follow this kind of, pardon me, supporting character in Kobe's story, I thought it was worth diving deeply into it for the Inquirer, and so I spent several months working on this piece, reporting it, researching it. We got our video team involved and our photographers involved. We were able to do a sit-down video interview with Sultan. We had some great photographs of him at the school that he works at now, video of him interacting with kids, and we had time and runway to work with on this piece. And I generally do about one or two of these every year, where it becomes this thing that I take several months to work on. And given the constraints of space and the perception that people don't read stories like this anymore, I can tell you from my experience in the Inquirer that's not true. That if something is written well and reported well and is compelling, and I'm not talking about me or this piece in particular, I'm just talking in general at the paper, people will read it. And I enjoy doing pieces like this, and it was great to get our video and photography and visuals team involved in this. Often, it's challenging to do that because everything is quick. Hey, the Sixers are playing tonight. I got to write a column. We got to get a game story. We've got to get photos. Boom, boom, boom. But this afforded us more time and opportunity to really give it the treatment it deserved.
That's great. Um, And we certainly look forward to, what were some of the other stories that you've done with you said 1 or 2 a year. What else have you focused on?
So I did a piece a couple of years ago. It came out right after the pandemic, related to Kobe. It was kind of a lengthy essay about a classmate of mine in high school who had played against Kobe when Kobe was a freshman. And Kobe was 3 years younger than me. I went to Upper Dublin High School, which is a neighboring high school to Lower Merion. And the second game of Kobe's career was against Upper Dublin, my alma mater. And a video surfaced of that game after Kobe's death. And in that video was a clip of this classmate and friend of mine named Bobby McIlvaine, who had died on 9/11. And he was 26 years old at the time of his death and was this amazing person, this classmate. He was the top ranked male student in our class. He played basketball and soccer. He went to Princeton. He was going to do incredible things with his life, and then was tragically killed on 9/11. And the fact that this video surfaced in the aftermath of Kobe's death was something of a miracle, because Bobby's family had no video of him at all. They had still photographs of him, but they had no video of him at all 19 years after his death. And the fact that Kobe's death allowed this video of Bobby to surface was kind of this incredible gift in a way to his family. And I ended up writing about that and my relationship with Bobby. And it became a piece that really resonated with people. And actually, this story, for those readers who are familiar, the National Magazine Awards just came out, I believe, last week. And Jennifer Senior, a writer for The Atlantic, kind of told Bobby's story in a completely unique and different way from the way that I did. And she won the National Magazine Award for feature writing for her piece in The Atlantic. And if there's any justice in this world, she's going to win the Pulitzer this year for feature writing, because her piece is absolutely breathtaking.
And here's the that piece that we're talking about in terms of the article. Kudos. This is the video, I guess, right? That
yes, that's Bobby, number 24, and there's Kobe playing defense as a player for Upper Dublin kind of drives past him and scores. And yeah, it was an amazing kind of turn of events to have this video come up and resurface again, and being able to kind of intertwine Bobby's story with Kobe, two pretty unique individuals.
That's great. And kudos to our colleague Paula for finding that article really quickly so we could put it on the screen for folks. Before we take a break, we're approaching the 10 o'clock hour Eastern time. I do want to share with folks a special treat that we don't usually get to see with the New York Times, the comics in the Inquirer. Tell me, are you a fan of the comics?
I still check Doonesbury out every now and again. I mean, it's one of those things you're trying to balance, right? Like, you have longtime loyal readers who have certain expectations for what they want about in the paper, and the comics are part of that. And I think it's pretty cool that we still have them in the paper. Obviously, as you said, Neil, the New York Times isn't going to have that, but our readers still respond to it, and I think it's a terrific thing.
I certainly, I grew up reading the Times. I'm from New York originally. I grew up reading the New York Times, and it was then the Herald Statesman, Lower Westchester paper, and certainly enjoyed the comics, Doonesbury, Bloom County in particular, Andy Capp. Obviously, there's Peanuts. Family Circus was always good. And shout out.
That was my favorite when I was a kid.
Family Circus?
Yes, I love that. I don't know why. And Calvin and Hobbes, of course.
As we're coming up, the Letter Carriers Food Drive is going to be in May. I believe the second Saturday in May. Family Circus always did a special comic for the food drive, which is really, really great. But we'll give folks a chance. A little Garfield here, Hagar, Beetle Bailey, some classics.
A little trip back in time never hurt anybody.
What's that?
I said a little trip back in time never hurt anybody.
Exactly. So these were the comics. So what we'll do is we'll give you a little bit of a break, Mike. We'll ask you to come back for a final word about the book and a pro tip for writers. after we make a couple of quick announcements. Again, my name is Neil Parekh, and this has been a special Inky Read-Along produced in partnership with Inquirer Live. Thank you so much to the Philadelphia Inquirer for all of your support for today's show. As folks know, we usually focus on the New York Times, but this week it's been the Inquirer. And we've had a great conversation with Mike Sielski, one of their sports columnists, talking about his book about Kobe Bryant, The Rise, the Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality. And there's a kudos from Ian O'Connor, a previous guest on our show, one of the most triumphant and tragic sports stories ever told. Again, a quick kudos to our production team, Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. Thank you for all of your support for this show. And as we're talking about, and whenever we mention Carla, we also want to give a shout out to the Local Connection newsletter. The Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University brings you the Local Connection newsletter. Each week, it offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists. The best of all, it's free. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips, bit.ly/local news tips. We also want to thank our sponsor, Muckrack. Muckrack has been a long-term sponsor of SRI's shows. If you're interested in being a sponsor, please contact Sri at digimentors.group or Neil at digimentors.group. And we also want to make sure you know that this is produced from by our firm, Digimentors. We produce hybrid and virtual events for organizations large and small around the world. We also do social and digital consulting. So if you're interested in having us produce a show for you, please reach out. You can email us, Sri at digimentors.group or Neil at digimentors.group, and we'd be happy to talk with you about either social or digital consulting or an upcoming event that you might have. So with that, what we'd like to do is to bring back our guest, Mike Sielski, for a final word and then a pro tip for journalists. Mike, thank you again for all of your time. We've had a number of folks who've shared some comments, so you'll get a chance to think about this a little bit. My mom actually wanted to share. Bobby's parents got a great gift with that video, so thank you for that. Let's see. Emily says, thank you, Mike and the Sunday morning team. And for those who haven't been to Philadelphia in a while, it's time to come. So much to see, do, and eat. So we have a little bit of a Philly tourism boosting going on as well. Patricia said, thanks to the production team and to special guest Mike for an awesome episode. So Mike, final word about The Rise.
No, first of all, thank you to everyone who tuned in and watched, and thank you to the production team for making this happen. The book was really kind of a labor of love in terms of the work itself and the subject itself. Kobe Bryant was such a complex figure, and I wanted to be able to tell kind of a unique story about him and give readers and basketball fans and people who just like interesting stories a sense of him as a man in full. I didn't want this to be an homage to Kobe. I didn't want it to be, hey, Kobe Bryant was the greatest person in the history of people, because he certainly was not. But he was an incredibly compelling, popular figure in our culture. And I hope people who pick the book up, that's what they take away from the story of his early life. The elevator pitch I made for the book when I tried to get it sold was I wanted to write Batman Begins for the Black Mamba. And I'd like to think I did that.
And again, that's Mike Sielski's book is Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality, The Rise and the Pursuit of Immortality. So thank you for that. And then, Mike, what about a pro tip for writers?
Be open to when the writing mind opens itself to you. I would say one of the things that I do, and I think it's probably pretty common amongst writers or journalists, is if I have a column or a story that I have to write, it's that idea and that piece or story is bouncing out of my head at all times. And even if it's at 2 o'clock in the morning and I think of a line or I think of a way to start the piece or something about it that I want to include in it, I will bounce out of bed and I will grab a pen and a piece of paper, or I'll grab my phone and open up the notes app and speak it in there. I feel very much like those sorts of moments are fleeting, and I don't want to. I don't want that idea or that detail to kind of float away on the wind. So make sure you catch them. Make sure that you are ready and open at all times to them, because the more of them you catch, the easier it's going to be to write whatever it is you're going to write. Hey, I remember this quote. I got to use that. Hey, this line is really good, and I just thought of it. That's how I want to frame it. Let me write it down so that I have it and can hold on to it. Because if you let them go, the process is going to be much, much more challenging.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it. Miriam shares a very interesting show. Excellent guest. Thank you again for joining us. For folks who may have joined us late, just know that you can watch this show in its entirety from the beginning. As soon as we're finished with the show, you'll be able to find it on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. In just a few minutes, you can watch from the beginning, which is great, on the same links that you have. Feel free to share it with friends if they're interested, not just in sports, not just in Philadelphia, but I think we covered a lot of interesting issues, particularly around COVID, around writing. And as Mike talked about in terms of the audience, he's looking to attract not just passionate fans, but casual fans as well. And we try to do that as well with our show. Primarily, a lot of people are interested in journalism, are interested in print media, but we also want to attract casual viewers who want to have a nice conversation on a Sunday morning among friends, where we cover a range of different issues and learn about the writing process during that conversation. So watch the show on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, or our Digimentors website from the beginning if you joined us late. We have Ken. I think we can close on this. You gained an admirer and promoter today, Mike. And thanks again to the production team. So
thanks, Ken.
If we did nothing else, we got you an extra fan or two that might balance out some of those.
Yeah, sorry for sharing that particularly graphic anecdote. I apologize.
No, that's perfectly fine. You kept it clean, suitable for
as much as I could.
A family show on Sunday mornings, which is great. But we'll catch you as soon as we're off the air. We'll see you in the studio, Mike. And again, we want to thank everyone for joining us. Our guest was Mike Sielski, and we focused on the Philadelphia Inquirer today. And this was produced in a partnership with Inquirer Live. So thank you again to all of our friends at the Philadelphia Inquirer for this special show. Just to make sure folks know, we will be taking Easter off next Sunday, but we will be returning on April 24th next week, the week after. Thank you very much, and have a great Sunday. Bye-bye.